Don't we all know exactly where we were when we heard for the first time?
The information was that Diana had survived at that point.
It was just a devastating moment, and I think universal.
I thought how horrible and yet typical. Here was a survivor. Diana wasn't dead.
I said, oh, of course not. It's not true. You know, they're always putting up stories about Princess Diana.
I called Kensington Palace, and it was 3 a.m. in the morning there, but I knew somebody would answer, and sure enough, somebody did answer, and they told me that the princess was doing very, very poorly.
I immediately called her on her mobile phone. There was no answer.
And by morning, with more calls in the middle of the night, we had heard the news and just stunned, can't believe it.
It was just like, you know, oh my God, no.
We turned on the TV and of course it was all over the news. It was just unbelievable.
I just couldn't believe what they were saying to me.
Not Diana. She was just, you know, coming out of all of these problems, becoming her own person. This couldn't possibly be true.
It's so hard to believe, if you're my age, that somebody her age could be the one to die.
The rest of the day was just some sort of daze. I'm quite glad I had to work that day. So I think I might have spent the rest of the day in tears.
I don't know how we, as a people, will ever be able to reconcile her death and ever be able to come to terms with the death of one of the most profound and beautiful people the world will ever know. I still can't believe it.
Sorry.
The funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales, on September the 6th, 1997, was a huge and regal occasion. Millions lined the route, cities came to a standstill, and television stations the world over cleared their schedules to carry pictures of the young princes following the coffin on which lay the wreath of white rosebuds, bearing its heartbreakingly simple message: Mummy. A 100 million people, astonished at the depth of their own reaction, mourned a young woman who'd been in the public eye for only 16 years, but who had won the respect of statesmen in the hearts of the world. Diana Spencer, who was born on the 1st of July 1961, was the third child of Earl Spencer and the Honourable Francis Burke Roach. Both families had been courtiers, well, administrators actually, to the royal family for generations. They were aristocrats and were said by many to regard themselves as more royal than the royals, partly because their English ancestry stretched back further than the royal families. The Spencers had made fabulous amounts of money out of owning sheep, and there's a story hard to verify that when the first Earl Spencer got married in the 18th century, he was wearing million-dollar buckles on his shoes. Like almost all aristocrats in the United Kingdom, Viscount Althorp sent his young children away to boarding school.
Diana's father told me that the best thing for Diana to do was to go to Riddlesworth School, which was a very home-based prep school and very suitable for someone in Diana's situation. She also had friends there. Diana's father said that she, perhaps out of all the children, had been the most disturbed at the breakup of their marriage. She was at the most susceptible age, really.
The house that Diana lived in with her father and her sisters Jane and Sarah and younger brother Charles was Park House on the Queen's estate at Sandringham in Norfolk. Diana's grandparents, who were also courtiers, had rented the house from King George V.
Park House was a comfortable, cosy home. Diana's father said that he was looking to make a warm, happy atmosphere for the children to come home to. And he was hoping that I would stay really until Charles, her young brother, went off to prep school, which would give some sense of continuity, because I found out that there had been quite a number of changes of help within the house. And to a degree, I think Diana and Charles used to club together and decide they didn't like a specific person, not for any major reason except that she wasn't the mother. One or two of the tricks that Diana got up to, for example, she would lock the nannies in the toilet and throw away the key. She would go into their rooms, which she wasn't really meant to do, and get their clothes and throw up on the roof so that the man who worked there, he had to clamber up and get them down. Nothing really major, but anyway, for whatever reason, no one stayed very long.
Norfolk, where Diana grew up, is rich farming country, flat and often windswept. It was the landscape she loved.
We did lead a very country existence. She was happiest just in trousers and an old top. She wasn't in the least bit interested in clothes. She absolutely hated dressing up. On the few occasions I had to struggle to get her into a dress or a skirt, she would only go put these clothes on. Do I really have to do this? And I don't see what it matters what I'm wearing. No one's going to look at me, and as long as I'm there, what does it matter?
She was just one of the others with a tatty pullover and long skirt. I mean, they were all terribly untidy at school, and she was no exception.
Diana was very much like any other child. She knew the ways of boarding schools, particularly as quite a number of her friends came.
It gives me great pleasure to open the hall and to wish Miss Rudge every happiness in her retirement. My years at Westheath were certainly very happy ones indeed. I made many friends who I often see, and in spite of what Miss Rudge and my other teachers may have thought at the time, I did actually learn something. Though you would never have known by my O-level results.
She was often slightly in the background with a smile on her face as though she was just going to be very naughty, which she usually was.
She was always bringing back food illegally to eat when they're not supposed to bring it back, and they would have midnight feasts in bedrooms.
Perhaps now, when future generations are handed out punishments for talking after lights, pillow fights and illegal food, they will be told to run 6 times round this hall.
She was one of the regular squad who weeded the gardens with me on Saturdays as a punishment.
It has to be preferable to the lacrosse pitch or weeding the garden, which I became a great expert at.
I think they preferred weeding the garden to running around the cross pitch. That generally happened before breakfast and was colder and more active, and she was involved in that too.
Diana's main love was to be outside with her animals. She had a guinea pig that she was extremely proud of, called Peanuts. She used to nurture a tremendous amount of love and care on this guinea pig. Peanuts went to school with Diana, came home from school with Diana, was entered in the flower show, which we held annually, and won prizes for Diana. And Diana would be out playing with these animals or helping Mr. Smith, who used to work outside in the gardens, or trying to help Mrs. Smith, who used to work in the house. Diana always loved to be doing things. She really didn't mind what she was asked to do as long as it was practical and she felt she was helping.
The Leggett Cup is awarded every term for helpfulness.
Diana was lucky enough to be at a school where the abilities that she had were recognised. Helpfulness was considered a prize-winning quality.
Pets Corner, wherever.
She loved being domestic and just helping out and doing things like that. The domestic staff always loved having her around, whereas they hated having some other people around.
Helpfulness is rewarded by this cup.
The tiny cup she won for her skills is still awarded today.
Well done, Clemmy.
Diana's always asked me if I needed any help about the house, and she was much better at cleaning than I ever was. She was only 9, this little girl with her mousy, shoulder-length brown hair. It did save me from quite a few problems with her father by going around checking on my dusting, etc. Naturally, I talked about what she enjoyed doing most and her favourite subject. Her favourite subject was basically swimming or anything outside.
She was a very good swimmer. She spent a lot of her time practising, both at school and at home. But she was even better at diving.
One of the things that stand out most in my mind was of the young Diana standing on top of the water slide, shouting, "Look at me, look at me." And only when she had everyone watching her would she then execute this most fantastic dive into the pool.
She truly could go into the water without making a splash in an absolutely straight line. She was very, very good, and she loved it.
Diana loved to be the centre of attention. If she was confident and knew all the people around her, then she was extremely extrovert. She was only shy when she didn't know the people around her.
She had that element of shyness which we never broke through. She had a really lovely singing voice. We'd heard her when she didn't know we were listening, but we couldn't get her into the choir. She was too shy to take the audition.
Dancing, of course, was her real forte, and she was very gifted, or rather, as far as a tall, long-legged person can be gifted. She was very graceful and a joy to watch. And she spent a lot of time just practicing by herself. She'd get up early and just go and practice.
We did lots of ballet music because that was another interest of hers. The main piece that I remember was a piano duet by Dvorak, which is the Slavonic dance in G minor, which is pretty difficult. And she was determined to learn it, and she did. And she played it with great brilliance, wrong notes everywhere, lots and lots of laughter, but really a musical performance.
Like most teenagers, Diana got bored with quiet country life. Unlike most, her father bought her a flat in London. She shared it with 2 friends and took her place amongst the young aristocrats who lived in and around Sloane Square. And she became what social commentators like Peter York and Anne Barr dubbed Sloane Rangers, upper-class youngsters who all knew each other. The girls wore a sort of uniform of pleated skirts, pearls and frilly blouses. And they all had a habit of playing practical jokes on one another, daft habits, I thought, most of them, throwing bread rolls at parties and generally behaving rather stupidly. They were just, of course, filling in time, really.
Upper-class people in England have a sort of service tradition, what sometimes called noblesse oblige. They also have a tradition of doing absolutely mad jobs, like silly jobs, non-jobs. Nobody thought that Diana would get a PhD or an MBA or run an international corporation. That wasn't the idea. The idea was be in London, meet people, have a good time, do something useful, and then get married to somebody she knew.
Diana was a nanny from heaven. She was openly affectionate with Patrick, genuinely warm. She'd scoop him up every morning when she came into work. She would stand with him on her hip, talking to me in my bedroom as I finished getting dressed. At the end of the day, he was clearly just as happy as he could be. You know, it was very clear to me as a mother that he'd had a wonderful 8 hours with her. You know, I knew this was the right nanny for my son.
Can I ask you, was your own childhood particularly a good one?
Oh, yes.
Was? Did that prompt you into wanting to do it?
Not particularly. Just love children.
She was the most helpful, sweet, accommodating youngster. She would wash up the breakfast dishes or run a load of laundry without my even asking her, make up the beds, tidy up the toys and so on. And one of the sweetest things she did was she had a car in London. I didn't, so she would pick up stuff that she knew it was hard for me to get home with a, you know, pushing a stroller and hauling bulky items from the store. Again, didn't have to ask her, she just did it to be nice.
She knew all the right people, she was connected with the royal family, and they thought that she would, as they say in England, know the form.
Diana went out of her way to be vague about exactly where she lived, where her hair was done, where she spent her weekends. She would answer things very non-committally and briefly.
My job was primarily to find who the Prince of Wales was going to make his queen, who was going to be his wife. Prince Charles had said that 30 was a good age to get married, and he was about 28. So the picture at the time said, well, let's have a look at him, see what he's doing.
After she'd been working for me for 4 or 5 months, I was tidying up at the end of the day, and I found a bank deposit slip, kind of just tucked under the skirt of the sofa, and I assumed it had fallen out of her handbag. The bank name was Coots & Company, which I knew from my job was the private bank for the Queen and the aristocracy. And at the bottom of the slip, it said Lady Diana Spencer.
Slowly I used to get different girlfriends, and it was coming together, but never the one, until one day I spotted Diana at a polo match and was said that she was there as his guest. But I didn't know what she looked like, and I walked all around this field, polo field, and I saw this young girl, blonde girl, and she was wearing a D necklace, and I thought, that's got to be her. And I walked up to my camera, and she posed me like that. And I did 2 shots, only 2 shots, and I thought, that's her. That was in the July. In September, the first week in September, I go up to Scotland. There's a traditional Highland Games that the royal family attends called the Braemar Gathering. And I'm on my way to the Braemar Gathering, driving by the castle, and I see Charles and Diana by the riverbank. And I jumped out of my car. There's a great story about the pictures, how she hid amongst the trees, but finally it was her. And we ran the story the next day. He's in love again, the prince, and there was this picture of Diana they did at the polo, and she has all the qualities to be queen.
One morning in September, when she'd been away in Scotland, she came bounding into my bedroom, said, Mrs. Robertson, I have something very important to tell you. And I sort of said, go right ahead, Diana, and I continued to blow my hair dry and, you know, not paying much attention. And she said, no, Mrs. Robertson, I'd like your full attention. So I turned off the hairdryer, turned to face her, and she explained to me that when I went to work that morning, I would see reporters and photographers at the end of the mews. She went on to explain that they were waiting for her. I said, good heavens, Diana, you know, what have you done? And she said she'd spent the weekend up at Balmoral.
I thought, God, you know, what's he running around with teenagers for? I thought, I can't believe it, you know, because Prince Charles was coming up to 30. I think he was 30 then.
In my position, you're going to marry somebody who perhaps one day is going to become queen. And you've got to choose somebody very carefully, I think, who could fulfill this particular role. Because people like you, perhaps, would expect quite a lot from somebody like that.
I asked her if she thought there was any chance of a romance developing, because we all knew that Prince Charles was in, you know, need of a wife. And she said no, with tremendous regret in her voice. No, I don't think so. After all, he's 31 and I'm only 19. I don't think he'd ever look at me seriously.
Lady Diana's London flat laid siege by photographers. Their activities put an end to an uneventful lifestyle of flat sharing with 3 girls during the week and weekend retreats to stay with friends in the country in search of fresh air and exercise.
Suddenly last September, the popular papers discovered she'd spent a weekend at Balmoral as the Prince's special guest, and unsuspecting, she'd allowed them to photograph her at the school with the sun behind her, wearing no slip.
The Prince of Wales was in a difficult situation. As soon as he began to be spotted around town with a succession of beautiful women, the speculation began about who he would marry and when. Of course, ideally, he would marry for love. But he also had to provide the next heir to the throne, and the woman he married had to be approved by the Queen. So he needed to find someone with no past, someone whose conduct was beyond reproach.
For a girl of 19, it was a difficult time, although perhaps a necessary demonstration of just how great are the pressures of living constantly in the public eye.
Lady Diana. Lady Diana.
We thought it was going to be announced on his 32nd birthday, but there wasn't, and he told reporters yesterday that it may be coming soon. Have you any comment to make about that?
Lady Di. Lady Diana.
No comment all that. Did you have a good weekend, though?
It's work now, okay?
She tried to carry on as best she could, and she did come to work most days. Occasionally, she would call in the mornings and say, you know, she hoped I wouldn't mind, but she just could not walk out the front door and face the press. It was just too stressful. I would say, that's fine, I understand. I would call my office and say, I can't come to work today because Diana can't come to work. But of course, they thought it was terribly exciting that my babysitter was dating their future king.
Is there any possibility of any announcement of your marriage in the near future? Can you tell me? Can you tell me if there's any possibility?
But I'm not going to say anything, so...
Right, but Prince Charles did give us a hint himself. He said we wouldn't have to wait too long.
She knew she had to be terribly careful and terribly discreet and, you know, polite and cheerful all the time.
Was he completely off theme when he said we wouldn't have to wait too long?
No.
A lot of pressure for an inexperienced 19-year-old.
The announcement of the engagement in February 1981 finally put an end to years of speculation about who would get the job, as insiders at the palace put it somewhat unromantically.
I think it was February 24th. I picked up the phone while I was making the beds, and it was a friend from London saying, Mary, it's Dina, your girl made it. And I mean, I just shrieked, I jumped for joy. I knew it meant that Diana had become engaged to Charles. And I just get chills thinking about it now. I was so happy for her because I knew this was, you know, what she wanted more than anything in the world.
Can you take us back to when you first met? You remember when you first met?
Yes, certainly can. It was 1977 that Charles came to stay as a friend of my sister Sarah's for a shoot. We sort of met in a ploughed field.
I understand that Prince Charles actually asked you for your daughter's hand.
Yes, he did. Very nicely.
And I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on.
He said, rather surprisingly, she agreed to marry me, he said.
At what point did you decide that this was the right lady for you? I mean,
well, gradually.
I remember when Prince Charles announced his engagement, I sent him a telegram and saying, congratulations on your forthcoming marriage, or something like that. And he sent me one back and it said, thank you for your kind remarks. I hope you won't be made redundant. But of course, I was going to be made redundant. It just started, the Diana bandwagon.
He's getting on a bit, isn't it? About time we got married.
Well, I remember thinking what a very jolly and amusing and attractive 16-year-old she was. And having great fun and bouncy and full of life and everything.
Why are you so pleased?
Because I think she's just the right person for him.
I don't know what you thought of me.
Pretty amazing.
It was clear she was madly in love with Charles. Her dream had come true, and at the time, of course, I thought it would be a fairy tale.
do you find it a very daunting experience that yesterday you were a nanny looking after children, now you're about to marry the Prince of Wales, and one day you would, in all likelihood, be Queen? It's a tremendous change for someone, if I may say, of 19 to make all of a sudden, the transition.
It is, but I've had a small run-up to it all in the last 6 months. And next to Prince Charles, and I can't go wrong. He's there with me.
I'm sure Diana will be a wonderful wife to Prince Charles and a wonderful mother to his children.
And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
When I wrote to her and congratulated on her marriage, I reminded her of our childhood conversation and said, well, you know, Diana, one thing's for sure, you're marrying the only person in the country from whom you can never be divorced, because she did have parents who were divorced, and she wanted to make it clear to me that she herself would never, ever consider getting married unless she was absolutely, really in love, and unless that person loved her.
She absolutely and utterly adored this man. You have to remember that when she went into this relationship, she was not a woman of the world at all. She'd barely been out of Britain. She was a country girl. She was sweet and kind and old-fashioned, and so she was so happy to please him.
And Lady Diana didn't disappoint those anxious to see her on her first public outing with her prince. His lady had well and truly arrived in a manner few of those present were likely to forget in a hurry.
And the palace especially were unlikely to forget. Diana's first attempt at winning the approval of her prince and her country proved just how unsophisticated she was. A plunging décolletage in black, a colour that royal women are not supposed to wear unless they're in mourning. 2 protocol mistakes in her first outing.
Probably you would be just expected to know what was done and what wasn't done. And Diana didn't know what to do and what not to do. She wasn't used to royal protocol. She wasn't used to all the ins and outs of royal protocol, and kind of landed herself in the deep end and had to learn terribly quickly.
The 29th of July 1981 was confirmed as the date of the wedding. It was to be held in St. Paul's Cathedral and not the more traditional Westminster Abbey. 2 weeks later, Diana moved among delighted crowds for the first time and followed her instinct then, as she would do for the rest of her life. Interest in Diana grew fast, and at a polo match a few days before the wedding, there was much sympathy when Shy Di, as the press called her, burst into tears in public. At the time, unwilling to believe that any cloud hung over the couple's horizon, everyone accepted Prince Charles's explanation of her behaviour.
It's not much fun, actually, when you're being surrounded by people with very long lenses, poking them from all directions, actually, the entire time. And I think all this adds up to a certain amount of strain each time, and it told eventually. Hardly surprising. And so I would only hope that after we get married, it'll be a bit easier to come to a polo match without this kind of, intensity of interest.
I think the vulnerability Diana displayed here and continued to show throughout her life was one of the main reasons why we loved her. She had problems, just like we did. But we were also beginning to experience her remarkable magnetic personality. I mean, we'd seen pictures of this young nanny with the children she looked after, and even in those pictures, she drew you in. It was a personal thing. You felt you knew her. You felt you understood her. You even felt you wanted to protect her. By this time, we were fascinated by Diana, and wedding fever had gripped the country. And so that no one would be disappointed with the fairy tale bride, she called in the experts.
She wanted to look really good for her wedding. She wanted to know really what to do, how to do it, and how she should prepare for the makeup and for that day. And so what we did was we decided we would do an experimental makeup, which basically meant she showed me what she was doing, and then I made her up the way I thought we could work it out, pattern for a face for the day. One of the first things I really wanted to do was to get her away from the blue eye pencil, because I wanted her to wear brown eyeshadow, and occasionally I'd sort of go and do her makeup, and then I'd sort of leave while she was getting dressed, and then she'd come down and start to giggle, and I said, "Oh, you haven't?" And she'd say, "I have," and she'd go like that, and she'd put the blue eye pencil back on again.
Royal weddings are not that frequent in England, and when they do occur, they tend to be rather formal state occasions. But before it even took place, everyone knew that this wedding would be different, because Diana was different. Despite the fact that 70 countries were televising the ceremony, that spies were trying to discover what the dress looked like, and that the seating plan included almost 3,000 people, Diana's charm made all of us feel part of it.
Diana did say to me the morning of the wedding, the crowds were outside the window and we were watching them on the television in her bedroom, and she said to me, "Oh, this is a lot of fuss for one girl getting married." I remember that she was actually getting into the carriage in Clarence's house, and of course the carriage is very beautiful, extremely ornate and glass shining, and she was completely beautiful, and I sort of sat her down and I just sort of held her hand for a minute as she got in. She leaned towards me and looked around, and I don't know if you remember, there was an ice cream commercial running at the time which was situated in a very fancy gondola. It had a little song in it which was One More Cornetto.
Just one cornetto.
And she leaned towards me and sang the little aria and then leaned back after the carriage drove off. And I thought, there's a good girl with a sense of humour.
Give me cornetto.
When she had to get out of the carriage and all these miles and miles of billowing English silk, she didn't think she was actually going to be able to get out and climb out of the carriage. And it was so sweet, and she was giggling about it. And then when her father took her arm, she told me he'd had a stroke, and she just didn't know if he was going to make it. She was more concerned about her father being able to make it down the aisle than anything.
For better, for worse.
For better, for worse.
For richer, for poorer.
For richer, for poorer.
In sickness and in health.
In sickness and in health.
To love and to cherish.
To love and to cherish.
Till death us do part.
Till death us do part.
I, Diana Francis.
I, Diana Francis.
Take thee, Charles Philip Arthur George.
Take thee, Philip Charles Arthur George.
To my wedded husband.
To my wedded husband.
Well, we had arranged that we would meet so that I could actually just touch her makeup up, because obviously by then it was going to be pretty hot. And we'd arranged that I would be in the vestry so that when she came in to sign the register, I could remove the veil and check her makeup before she sort of walked out. I was waiting for her and she came over to me, and I was actually going to remove the veil at the time, so she lifted it up. And it was just after she'd taken the vows, and she leaned towards me and she said, "You know," she's like, "I made a mistake." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Do you think anybody heard?" I think it was about like 88 million or something. But I just sort of smiled and went on, because I thought this is not the time to say yes.
She did have a hopelessly romantic view of marriage, and she truly believed in a marriage in which the husband and wife were in love and had children. She was a traditionalist at heart. I think at the time that Prince Charles proposed to her, she just believed that the two of them would adore each other and do everything to make each other happy, and that would be it.
I remember Princess Diana's wedding day as an absolutely staggering public occasion. The crowds that turned out, I mean, the whole of the Mall absolutely packed with people all the way along the procession to and from St. Paul's. Extraordinary. And I suppose, in a way, there must always have been something that we in our business refer to as star quality.
The princess mimicked the constant request to hold hands. Today, the Prince and Princess of Wales looked relaxed after their shipboard honeymoon.
How are you enjoying married life?
Highly recommend.
After their honeymoon, how did they find Scottish weather?
It's about 40 degrees cooler, I think, than the Red Sea where we were last. Oh, it's marvellous up in Scotland.
As Princess of Wales, Diana, of course, had a special duty to that country and visited its parliament soon after her marriage.
This was to be the occasion for the princess's first public speech, and she was looking distinctly apprehensive, with everyone taking bets on whether the princess would attempt a few words in Welsh.
Mae'n bleser cael dod I Gymru. Hoffwn ddod eto yn fuan. Diolch yn fawr.
Prince Charles also joined in, and the princess, now very much more relaxed, provided the translation.
I do hope that bore some relationship to what I meant to say, which is basically that it's a very great pleasure for me to come to Wales and to its capital, Cardiff. I look forward to returning many times in the future. And also, I'd like to just add how proud I am to be princess of such a wonderful place, and the Welsh people who are very special to me. Thank you.
It would be an incredible effort for her. She just couldn't speak slowly. She couldn't deliver a speech publicly. She panicked totally. In fact, I first came to know her when Prince Charles wrote to me asking if I could help his young bride with this particular problem. And so I used to go to Kensington Palace quite regularly to attempt to show her technique as far as public speaking was concerned. In fact, it wasn't technique that was needed. What I tried to show her, or give her, was self-confidence. This lack of self-confidence remained with Diana all her life, and often affected her behaviour. In fact, at this particular time, according to at least one person close to her, it was indirectly the reason for her quite dramatic loss of weight.
If it had to be pinpointed to what triggered Diana's eating disorders, it was the very moment that the man she absolutely loved and who she was going to marry put his arm round her waist and said, "Oh, you're a little bit chubby, aren't you?" Here was this man who Diana absolutely adored, and here was a faint criticism. And from that moment on, Diana's weight absolutely plummeted. She went from 29-inch waist on her engagement to 23-inch in 6 months to her marriage. Can you imagine?
The royal joke has it that the job of the future king's wife is to provide the country with an heir and a spare. So Diana must have been fully aware that as soon as possible after her marriage, she would be expected to have at least 2 children.
The country has developed the taste for another royal guessing game. Is she or isn't she pregnant? Even the newspapers are divided. Some think she is, one says she definitely is not, and the Daily Star suggested in a cartoon that even the royal family is being kept in suspense.
The country, of course, fueled by the media guessing game, couldn't wait for the event. And by now, everyone was agog.
13-year-old Fiona Passmore couldn't contain her curiosity. As the princess came over to talk to her, Fiona decided she'd better pop the question. Patting the princess, she asked, "How's the baby?" The princess, taken aback, asked, "Did I hear that right?" but said no more, leaving everyone laughing, except an embarrassed teacher and a little girl, still without an answer, but still trying to find out.
At last, on November the 5th, 1981, the newspapers confirmed that the princess was pregnant.
Could we ask you, Lord Spencer, have you any thoughts about whether you'd prefer a girl or a boy?
Whether it's a boy or a girl, it doesn't matter at all, as long as it's a healthy baby. And the baby's well done as well, that's all that matters.
At one stage, the prince was presented with a pair of booties to give his wife for their future child. He had earlier apologized for the princess's absence.
I'd like to say how very sorry my wife is that she couldn't come today and see you all here. I'm sure you all appreciate the reasons, but I'm told that after 3 months things are inclined to get better, which is what I hope is going to be the case. But I'm quite prepared to accept full responsibility for the situation.
Prince William was born at St Mary's Hospital on June the 21st, 1982, and England had its second king in waiting.
The Royal Highness and her child are both doing well. Can you tell us how the princess is?
She's very well, thank you.
Earl Spencer.
Good morning.
How is she?
Very well indeed, thank you.
And your son?
He's in excellent form too, thank goodness.
Lovely baby, really super baby.
Looking a bit more human this morning.
Not a little pack-it-up face at all, really good one. Hello, how are you?
Shan Kid, how do you feel about the news?
A grandson is everything his father said last night. Lovely baby.
And how's the prince?
Very happy. A lot of happiness up there.
When do you think your wife will be coming home, sir?
I hope as soon as possible.
The birth of Prince William is said to have been among the happiest times of the Prince and Princess of Wales during their marriage. And I think that's true. There was a considerable bond between them then, because both of them really did adore the baby. But this must also have been the point at which Diana began to realise that her life as a royal princess was set to follow a course that had been plotted generations before and would be repeated, unless she did something about it, for generations to come. The baby's christening photo call illustrated the inevitability of it all. Prince William's was held in the same room at Buckingham Palace as Prince Charles's had been. The baby was dressed in the same christening robe made from Honiton lace, which had been used by successive generations of the royal family for over 100 years. Even the procedure must have been laid down in some handbook of royal protocol. And next, the proud great-grandmama holds the new baby on her knee. And then out come the props. Let's see, the rug has changed, and so is the swing. But it's still Daddy doing the pushing while Mummy looks on fondly. But Diana found that motherhood gave her the confidence and strength to fight for changes in royal protocol. For example, in the past, royal babies had always been left at home while royal parents travelled abroad. But when the Prince and Princess of Wales visited Australia in 1983, Diana absolutely refused to accept the situation. She insisted that baby William came too, and it clearly worked.
First fly on him already.
It made the public feel closer to this new and modern royal mother and helped cement the couple's own relationship, as they demonstrated on their visit to a local radio station.
Question. What is Prince William's favourite toy?
Jamie, he loves his koala bear he's got. But he hasn't got anything particular. He just likes something with a bit of noise.
Plastic whale which throws things out.
He got a plastic whale that throws things out the top, little balls.
At the early stages of their marriage, when Prince William was born, you could see the great warmth and affection and love between them. You look at any pictures from that time in any press throughout the world, and it's clearly visible. And she said, yes, that really, she felt that was so.
As Diana began to learn her royal craft, the world recognised a star in the making. September the 15th, 1984. Diana had done her duty by her prince and by the nation, with William the heir and Harry the spouse.
There was not a lot of sympathetic understanding between the men in the royal household and their wives. I think Charles was very much of this mould. Rather look at your wife and think, well, come on, old girl, get on with the job. You know, this is your duty. You know, everyone's looking at you. Pull yourself together. Because that's how they've been brought up themselves. You don't show emotion. You don't have feelings. You've got the whole country looking at you. You know, do what you're there to do.
There is a very firm feeling amongst many of Diana's close friends that it was really at this point that her fairy tale life started to ebb away.
It was only after Prince Harry was born that really she felt things changed. She felt that Camilla had come back strongly on the scene.
Camilla Shand had first been a girlfriend of Prince Charles 20 years before, just after he left Cambridge University. They were said to be in love, but with Prince Charles unwilling to commit to marriage, Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles and had a family. But she and Charles never stopped being friends. As Diana began to find the pressure and the claustrophobic atmosphere more and more oppressive, she became increasingly desperate and tried almost anything she could think of to help get her through this particular period.
There were severe cracks in that marriage, but it certainly hadn't come to light. She was very concerned about Camilla at that time, and her marriage and the state of it, her own happiness, whether her own personal happiness would ever improve. And she wanted me to look at her chart and Charles's chart. She was just looking for, I suppose, any kind of answer or any kind of light that could be shed on her predicament.
I'll wheel my bullet at you in a minute.
I gave her a little bit of acupuncture, but I also balanced the chakras and advised her particularly. I think counselling was a big part of my contribution to Princess Diana.
It was not really a relationship where we sat and pored over, you know, the stars. They didn't sort of completely inform her every move. It was more of a sort of backdrop towards a kind of counselling.
Her greatest need certainly was to have her confidence in herself restored.
I think she was enormously confused about life, and I think she went to see all these people, various people. You know, she flew off here and there to see everybody, to try and find some route for her, to try and find some stability.
Maybe in a way we represented that kind of mother figure which she always needed and wanted.
In the absence of her real mother, who had lived in Scotland and abroad since her divorce from Earl Spencer, Diana relied on a whole group of older and wiser women. Her confidants were her lifeline.
She had the most wonderful relationship with Lucia Fleischer de Lima. Lucia was like a second mother to her.
I really loved her as a daughter. I really loved her. And she was a most wonderful friend to me.
Diana and Lucia would be on the phone almost every day without fail.
She brought a lot of joy, of light, of laughter, of dramas into my life. Richard, she made me feel young again. It's true.
What a gift.
She made me feel her age. We would share things. In a way, I don't think mothers and daughters do share. But I'll always be afraid that I didn't do enough for her. You know, I really loved her.
When Lucia asked me if I would be Diana's friend, I realized this would be a tremendous commitment and that I would be there for her. But I regarded it as such an incredible honor, and I took it very, very seriously. And I feel very good now, in retrospect, that I could be somebody who nobody knew about.
From the numbers of women whom I know, who she considered friends, and we, you know, have from time to time talked about Diana, and everyone who she confided in that I'm aware of kept her confidences. were very anxious to help her and support her.
She was so hurt by the situation with Camilla. She was definitely hurt enormously, and the way she would diffuse a situation like that for her was by putting some very sweet cartoons in her bathroom at Kensington Palace. It would be like somebody else putting a dartboard and taking some darts and throwing them, as somebody might do in a bar, but that was Diana's way of dealing with it. And I even remember for a short period of time that she'd had this disagreement with Elton John, and she said, well, he's joined the ranks. I have a cartoon of him next to Camilla. And then sure enough, when they made up, she would remove this. I almost had tears in my eyes listening to her because it was such a sweet and lovely way of dealing with something that had hurt her so much.
When Diana married into the royal family, she joined what is really a great business empire. It even calls itself the firm. And she married the chief executive officer's heir. Diana became a corporate wife, and corporate wives do not have ideas about how to improve the corporation. And if they do, well, they keep them to themselves. They're supposed to turn up at corporate functions, support their husbands, and behave in such a way in their private lives that the corporation remains untainted by scandal or gossip.
It was difficult because she had a vision for royalty for the coming century, a modern vision. She wanted to be much more open, to embrace people, to be more open with everything. If they were going to a charity event or to visit the homeless or to visit the sick, that they shouldn't just stand afar and speak to them through somebody else. She felt it was very important to show a warmth and an interest, and she felt that if one wasn't interested in it and didn't show warmth or feel warmth, one shouldn't do it. This was quite a source of difficulty for both of them. Very often she would discuss so many different duties, things they had to attend to, and even if Prince Charles listened to her approach and didn't disagree with it, he would always, under every circumstance, defer to the Queen.
My feeling about Charles is he had such a wretched childhood. He probably really couldn't have responded to her the way that she needed him to respond. She expected him to really be there for her, to support her and guide her, and he just had a completely different view of the relationship.
If Diana found Prince Charles's support lacking, it may have been partly to do with her own increasing popularity. Though her husband may not have appreciated her new informal approach to the duties of monarchy, the public, it seemed, did. And many husbands find it hard to come to terms with a wife's success.
I think he got a bit resentful of this, and he became, I say, a little bit sour and bitter. And in a way, I don't blame him because, you know, he was slighted. And I remember once we went to Silverstone, a racetrack where they hold the British Grand Prix, and he was there on his own. And a little boy come up and said, "Oi, Charlie, where's Di?" And he said, "I'm sorry, she's not coming today. You better ask for your money back."
Despite the best efforts of both therapists and mother figures, the marriage was falling apart, and with the media following her every move, Diana used them to try and reveal her unhappiness to the public.
I remember once in India, the princess was going to the Taj Mahal, and everybody was at the Taj Mahal.
She visited the greatest monument to love in the world without her husband. She turned her face away when he tried to kiss her after a polo match. But hints were not enough, and eventually overcome by frustration, Diana felt compelled to tell the world the story of her miserable marriage, revealing the facts to journalist Andrew Morton via an intermediary. A cascade of gossip and rumour followed the Morton book, and the marriage was at an end. Diana and Charles separated, and in February 1996, after they had lived apart for the 3-year period required by law, Diana announced her agreement to a divorce, calling it the saddest day of my life.
When the divorce was decided, you know, I did say to her on one occasion, you know, you know, that must be a terrible blow to you, because I know that she never really wanted that to happen.
In the end, it was all so ordinary. A unique moment in history played out in a small green room known as Court Number 1 at Somerset House. An alphabetical list of 32 couples applying for a decree nisi was before the court, with HRH the Prince of Wales versus HRH the Princess of Wales appearing last. The document issued this morning sets out that it was the Prince who lodged the petition for divorce on the grounds that the marriage had irretrievably broken down because of irreconcilable differences. It was signed by both the Prince and Princess.
On the 28th of August the same year, the decree absolute was granted, and the fairy tale was over.
On the day the divorce she never wanted was finalised, Diana, Princess of Wales, as she now is, was on familiar ground, besieged by the world's media. She kept a long-standing engagement at the English National Ballet, one of only 6 organisations she's chosen to continue to support.
On the day of the divorce, when she was in here, yeah, she said, I'm having the most terrible day. This is one of the worst days of my life, but I have to accept it, and I have to get on with it, and let's go and watch some rehearsals.
Isolated from her prince and stripped of her royal title, Diana gained the love and sympathy of divorced women the world over. As feeling free to be herself again and liberated from the constraints of royal protocol, she did what so many of them have done. She shortened her skirts, raised her heel height, and called in her hairdresser.
She said, but what would you do with my hair given a free hand? And I said, well, honestly, she went, yeah, but I wouldn't ask you otherwise. And I said, I'd just get rid of it. I'd just cut it all off and start again. That was a bit of an eye-opener, to realise that someone's haircut could cause that much of a stir. And it wasn't even a hugely drastic haircut. It was just, you know, a bit shorter.
They were climbing on each other's backs. When Prince Charles came, 15 people turned out to say hello. The Princess of Wales came, the entire world came.
Could be flirtatious, and
it was most of the
time. Which made her even more delightful and attractive to the average person as well as photographers, so that she really combined some unique characteristics.
One of the most special was her determination that her sons would be unlike any royal princes to date. And despite her own increasing celebrity and their royal status, it was part of Diana's vision of a new monarchy that William and Harry would understand the real world. And she must have felt intuitively that the public, her public, were behind her in this.
She really was a wonderful mother. I mean, she was terribly involved with her children.
Sack races at school sports days are a feature of many young boys' lives. And so are mothers' races, but for the mother of the future king to be amongst the contestants is, to say the least, unusual.
She absolutely lived for her children. They came first, no matter what, and she tried her darn hardest to give those kids, to let those kids see a normal way of life.
I can remember one particular time we were talking about the kids, which she loved to do, and she was just telling me a little school story. This was when William was very small, and I think he was still at junior school. And she said, you know, he came back, ran into me and said, Mummy, I'm a prince. And I think they have to call me Prince at school. And she said to him, you know, I said to him, your name's William, and just don't forget it.
She stressed that she wanted to bring the boys up as normally as she could, and she used one instance of saying that she would give the boys a little bit of pocket money so that they could go in and buy sweets for themselves and just get used to interacting as normal people do. And she said, but Charles thinks that I'm overdoing it.
You took her with him to amusement park. This had a purpose. It was not just to please them, to do an outing with them. It was educational.
When customers come in, you go through the specials of the day. We told Princess Diana and the two princesses specials, and Harry turned round and said, is that just because it's Saturday special? And Princess Diana turned around and said, you get a special smack in a minute. So she was really down to earth. She was great.
She would take them to McDonald's, she would take them to the cinema, she would take them to Marks and Spencer's down the road in Kensington High Street or whatever, and she loved doing that, and it was really important.
They were put in the same situation as any other boy, and she thought that's very important.
She felt it was terribly important because of their positions and because of William's future, that he experienced firsthand what the world was really about, and not just read about it and be told about it, but to see it, to feel it, and to touch it. She would very often, on cold winter's nights, take them out on the streets of London, where there were no press, and take them to talk to the homeless and have conversations with the homeless and just experience the other side of life.
She really wanted them to know what the man of the street thought and how the man of the street felt, because she strongly knew that since William was meant to be king, he must know his subjects very well.
And she said then they would go home and they would be at Kensington Palace and they would have a hot bath and realize how terribly fortunate they were and think of ways in which they could help these people.
At this point in Diana's life, she could have become just another A-list celebrity. But Diana realized that she could use the people who'd made her famous and who photographed every detail of her day to give purpose and meaning to her life. She would put the burden of her fame to the best possible use.
When I met with the Princess of Wales the day after her divorce, I saw a woman who was excited about her prospects and concerned about whether she would be able to fulfill what she really felt to be her destiny. That destiny was very connected to her wish to show her compassion to the world, to open her heart to the world, to show her love and change and affect suffering as it existed. And I did everything I could to support her in finding ways to make that happen, if only to believe that it might, because the opportunity was so tremendous.
She felt compelled to try in her own way to demonstrate love, even though I think she believed she had not been loved well by many people.
She knew very clearly that her role was no longer what it had been with respect to the royal family. Everyone knew that. What was unknown was the extent to which she would be given the room to really go out there and speak for changing the world and making it a better place with less human suffering caused by humans to one another.
I was a battered woman, and I had to be put into a domestic violence shelter. And I came to Henry Street with 3 children, and because of the battering in the home, I was able to, flee and get into a safe environment.
I was homeless.
was homes with 8 children.
I had a house up in Westchester County that I lost when my husband died with 6 kids. So that's how I came here.
The women that she met with, the self-help women, we were very clear after I read my protocol and I told them, we all read up, we knew how to act. We were not going to embarrass Henry Street.
Before she came, we were trying to figure out, were we supposed to say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am? Were we supposed to curtsy? What were we supposed to, how were we supposed to greet her?
One of the self-help women, she couldn't act like we wanted her to act.
Me and my big mouth.
She looked at the princess and she kept saying, oh. And, we're kind of like, cool this, And so finally she said, oh, but you're so pretty. Just like that.
Her skin, it was just unreal. And I was like, can I say that?
And the princess, she was into it. And we just laughed.
He was a person that is so out into the open, in front of everyone. And she was caring about someone that's as small as me. That's the way I took it as, personally.
Right.
And just to hear that and to, and to feel it all of a sudden, it just made me feel special.
I was so surprised and struck about the natural, she felt just like anybody else.
Diana embraced wholeheartedly the AIDS charities. I remember the first time we went to the Middlesex Hospital, and I went with Barbara Bush, the president's wife, and Mrs. Bush came in with Diana, and Diana went to these patients as though she'd known them all her lives. She sat and talked to them inches away from their face, determined to show them that somebody cared about them. And she almost single-handedly took the stigma away from AIDS. I remember all the jokes among the photographers going into the AIDS ward, and they were making remarks like, oh, you need a 500mm lens in there and all this, because we were all ignorant. We were totally ignorant, and she was there to show us how ignorant we were, to show us that there was this tremendous ignorance in the country about AIDS and how we should approach it. She was urged not to get involved because it was considered not a very nice disease, and the sort of people that get it are not very nice people. It was suggested to her, but she didn't think like that. She thought anybody that was ill deserved compassion, and she gave it to them. And not only did she do it in the Middlesex Hospital in London, she did it in Harlem with babies, AIDS babies, and she was tremendous.
For her to give her time to spend it with children who were HIV infected, with people who had
leprosy.
Poor people, leprosy,
homelessness,
people who were being killed because of landmines and all. She did something that was unusual.
Because of who she was, she had the power to demand that sort of like the world would be brought to our backyard. And they had to come and stand in that yard because she was there. And so therefore, everyone had to really look and say, this is something that everyone needs to take heed to and do something about.
She kept drawing from this great reservoir of loving kindness, this spirit that she had, which couldn't be stamped out.
If you have a vessel, you can put so much into it. But if there's too much, if there's more than the vessel can hold, well, it has to go elsewhere.
I saw that in her. I mean, that great, joyous, exuberant love she showed her sons.
She had so much, it spilled out and spilled over onto humanity.
That empathetic, compassionate love she showed AIDS patients and landmine victims, the love that I think Mother Teresa saw in her and responded to.
Mother Teresa's hospice in Calcutta, literally people are dying there on the hour, and they're that sick. And the princess came in, and there must have been 100 men lying on stretchers on the floor, maybe a foot apart, 2 foot apart. And she went to each patient in that room and gave them a special suite that's got glucose in it. She knelt down, she sort of talked to them as best she could with one of the nuns, and as she walked around the room, her dress was getting dirtier and dirtier. She didn't care. She had this beautiful pink dress on, and when she walked out, she was covered in dust and dirt, and I think she was probably the most moved I've ever seen her. She just seemed to be as home there as if she was in a living room at Kensington Palace. And afterwards, the nuns sang to her, and she just wept, Diana. You know, she was so moved by it all.
That was her search to really do something major in the same line as Mother Teresa, but differently, with a different slant.
When you see Mother Teresa and the princess standing side by side, it isn't out of this world in terms of comparison. They both had a gift of compassion, and although totally different packages on the outside, you could see heart to heart that they understood it and recognized it in each other.
When Mother Teresa came to Kensington Palace and saw the vast amount of space that she had there, Diana told me, she had said to her, "Diana, you could hold so many poor people in this place. It's going to waste all this space."
Her position, of course, gave her entrees that many would not have, but she could not have pulled it off. It could not have survived the test of authenticity, both in person and across the television screen, if it had not been real.
I was a student in Israel in 1984, and I just went camping with 2 American friends in the northern part of the country, and we hiked off the beaten track, and next thing you know, we were camping in a minefield and had no idea. And it was on a sunny spring morning. I was walking across a field and the world exploded all around me. And then I spent 6 months in hospitals in Israel, undergoing amputations and skin grafts and learning to walk with a prosthesis, an artificial leg.
The princess was told how the teenager set off to market and was blown up by a landmine. That was just 6 months ago. Mazetta lost her right leg.
Diana brought landmines into every living room in the world. Without that lightning rod of her celebrity and the cameras following her, perhaps none of us would ever have really heard about the mass suffering caused by landmines. When we asked the Princess of Wales to join us in Bosnia, our intention was to introduce her to families who had been blown apart by landmines. I was stunned. The more we allowed her to work and to be appropriate and just reach out with people, with her hands, with hugging, with touching, and not being afraid of anyone, the more I saw something really special happening in these families' homes. It was something to step back and learn from.
Touching is one of the most important things in healing. Touch is the greatest healer of all.
I've never seen her wearing gloves, have you?
No.
No, she always touched people with bare hands. In the past, the kings were the one who were supposed to have this healing gift. I think that there was a special day during the year where people would go to the king and the king would put his hands, his bare hands, on these people and they would be free from some disease. And I think Diana really had this power. And I don't mean in the sense that she would touch you and be healed. But she brought such a hope, such a joy into sick people's life. She touched them with such a loving way. And I think she transmitted them a very positive energy that helped a lot of them through their illness.
In August '95, my lung collapsed and had to be rushed to hospital. And from that day onwards, my health's just gone down and down and down, really. And the part about my lung collapsing was it was about 6 weeks before my wedding. So I got out of hospital a week before the wedding, had my wedding, and then it collapsed again on the Tuesday. So my honeymoon was also back in the hospital. That's how I came to meet Diana.
I was 4'6" before I went forward for the operation. I'd been having growth hormone injections for several years beforehand, and I'd always known that with these injections I'd get to 5 foot. So when the doctors finally told me that I wouldn't get to that height, that I was not going to grow anymore as my bones had fused, I was absolutely devastated.
I broke my neck, spinal cord, around C2, C3. Area they're not quite sure. So this leaves me paralysed from the neck down. But the doctors did say that I'd never be able to breathe unaided by myself. And I've done that, so you never know.
I think Diana really had this gift. She never thought she was special. She never thought she was important. She thought she was just there to help people and to be with people. And I don't know.
My consultant said to me, Diana would like to come and visit you for a second time. So I said, oh, okay. And when she arrived, she walked past my room because I'd moved room. And she came back, sat down, said, oh, can I have a cuddle?
Yes, you can have a cuddle.
So she sat on the bed, she gave me a cuddle. She said, oh, I'm shaking. I said, well, it's the cameras, it's not you. And then when she sat down, she sat on the nurse's plate.
No, you're fine, you're fine.
No, push the red one.
Thank you. That's just me. No, it's me. Sorry.
It was lovely. It wasn't an act, it was a genuine feeling of what she felt. And you didn't feel unease with her. She didn't sort of make you think, oh, it's royalty. It was just so natural. But she was lovely.
The first thing I remember her saying to me is, I was a bit worried about what I was supposed to be doing, so I asked, should I curtsy to you? And she says, oh no, I should be the one curtsying to you. You're all so brave. So that put me at ease straight away. She said to me, keep in touch, let me know how you're getting on. And as any 10-year-old would, I took her at her word. And off went my first letter, just about a year later, seeing if she remembered me and telling her how I was getting on and how I was doing at school and everything. And to my surprise, she wrote back almost immediately and saying that she remembered me and just asking lots of questions. And I was absolutely amazed. I never thought that she would write back. And it just went from there. We wrote to each other right up until her death.
Well, Princess Diana was in Liverpool opening the new women's hospital, and she was visiting the Anglican Cathedral, and she'd read about me, and she knew me through the charity, through Simon Barnes, and she got in touch and asked could she meet with me and the family. I was just shocked and amazed, like, but I didn't know what I felt. Just couldn't believe it. She made me feel, even though I can't use my arms or my legs, like I could do anything. There was nothing I couldn't do. And it was just an incredible feeling. It's given me the biggest buzz of my entire life, I think.
She rang me on a mobile from the south of France on the Wednesday evening prior to her death. And people said, is she in love with Dodi Fayed? Is she going to marry Dodi Fayed? I mean, the papers and everybody. Well, I have no idea. But I do know I have never heard such fun and life and happiness in her voice. And I'm thrilled in a way that the last time I ever heard that voice, it was as full of happiness as I can ever remember.
She was just like this ever-present presence, as it were. And it wasn't until she died that I realized that that had been the case. It was suddenly like the top of the Christmas tree had been cut off, that she was the most glamorous woman that there could be. And she just disappeared. It was like the whole world was a little darker.
Shortly after her death, just about every session I had with a woman patient, it came up, and they were distressed. Most of my female patients were distressed, and almost all of them mentioned it in the session as something that they were aware of and felt incredibly sad about.
I had this absurd sense that I was connected to her in some way. When she was married, I was probably 15, 16 years old, something like that. And it was sort of prime time for fantasizing oneself as a princess.
People suddenly felt this terrible loss, that they'd lost the one person that they saw every single day of their lives in some way or other, whether it was on the television, it was in the New York Post, it was in the LA Times or the Washington Post, it was, you know, just hanging out, or there'd be, you know, one cover or other. The People magazine had her on so many times. And I think that they just felt this terrible emptiness.
Yeah, I don't know. She was like she was all the marvelous, glamorous things that one wanted to be.
With normal grieving, we have a ritual, and we have a support system, and we have things that we do, and there's a timetable that seems to go with it. We don't have a timetable for these kinds of people yet, and we don't know how it's going to end. So you give things, you buy things, you send things, and so we have a sort of a thrashing around. We're trying to show how do you express grief for somebody you've never met, but you still feel a loss.
There are as many ways of mourning our lost princess as there are mourners to grieve. What is shoddy and incongruous to one is appropriate and tasteful to another. And as we struggle to find our way through this unexpected grief, there is, it seems to me, no right way to behave.
It isn't that she lived and grew old and we could see her possibly not looking just like she used to look. It's like JFK. We will never get over JFK because the chapter can never be closed.
I think that the manner of her death and the fact that she was so young and it was all so unnecessary shook people. I think that in itself contributed to the sense of loss people had.
There's a certain kind of tragedy that, of course, occurs to anybody who dies before we'd expect them to.
I like to think that she was here for a reason, and not just one reason, for many, many reasons. And I think she has made it. Her life has made a difference.
Her impact is not bricks and mortar. I mean, her impact is not the wing of the hospital that's named after her and whose funds were raised in her name. I mean, her impact really is in the hearts of the doctors and nurses and patients who were in the hospital.
She was constantly striving to become better and bigger and more involved and to really challenge herself.
I think that the effect that Diana had is in the idea that someone could be this famous, the most famous, recognizable woman in the world, the woman whose picture appeared in every magazine, every newspaper, everyone knew her. And yet, in that role, she could seek to be idealistic and work hard for the betterment of humankind.
She tried to give hope to people. People who had no reason to have any kind of hope, no future, no nothing. Then she would come with her beauty, with her grace, with her smile, with her caring, and she would give that to them.
She provided a role that I think that many people need to have, need to know that someone can do this and stand and represent these ideas.
She was really at the top of her game, it seemed to a lot of us, and there was no telling what she would do, how she would influence the world, and how she would use her extraordinary presence on behalf of causes and people she cared about, and whether she would now finally have some private happiness at some point in the future.
Thank you for coming to our country.
I would say that she found the best possible way to live, which is to be there for other people. She'd found that.
By the end of her life, she had made it okay for people to say that they weren't okay,
In Diana, what you saw is one young woman who made a dent, who stood out, who had very, very little support. And yet, she had the courage to take it on, and she did get a response. She did cause some degree of change. And in that message, there's an empowerment for all of us very ordinary people that sometimes wonder if we can make a difference or not. And that is a very powerful message, and that's something that she does leave us.
I think Diana was one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. And I think the legacy that she's left behind her of care and consideration for those who have no voice and cannot deal with their own problems is a wonderful example of how one might attempt, and I fear fail, but nevertheless attempt to conduct one's own life. But let us make sure that what she stood for is carried on, and then her life will not have been totally in vain.